Alright YouTube, this is Romer45 here. I'm just here to make this is a video response to Styx's video in regards to the flaws of MGTOW. And it hurts for me to say this because I have to say something negative about one of my favorite YouTubers. Unfortunately, it has to be said because there are a lot of misconceptions which must be addressed. I want to talk about three major things where Styx literally dropped both of his balls into the river Styx on this topic. Worse than when John Lennon got married to Yoko Ono. The first statement that you said was that MGTOW was the one that created gynocentrism. And this is where you are completely incorrect, because MGTOW itself, the term has become popular ever since 2009, but the use of the term itself, men going their own way, dates back as early as 1853, without it being without referring it to what it is now, a lifestyle choice. But when it comes to gynocentrism, the use of that term dates back to the 1800s, and this was when it was in popular circulation. However, the first use of that word was around 1102 AD. And this is in regards to the man responsible. His name was William the Ninth, who was the Duke of Aquitaine in France. And he had said this in one of his poems, and I quote, "It was his will to bear her in battle as she had born him in bed." After doing a little bit of research, I consider that he wasn't fully supportive of gynocentrism. Rather, he was using this as an excuse just to have sex with women and sleep with them. So in essence, he was a pickup artist. But like most pickup artists, while they do have some alpha tendencies, they also use beta tendencies just to try and sleep with them. As most men always try to find some way to satisfy their dick instead of developing their brains. But moving away from that, the reason why he did this was because he was what was known as a troubadour. That was his nickname. What is a troubadour? It's essentially a French medieval lyric poet who composes and performs several songs that he himself has written. Think of it like Justin Bieber or Jason Mraz of the 12th century. And what they write about is mainly themes of chivalry and courtly love. Basically anything to swoon the woman and, get her to have sex with you. The thing is, while this event wasn't a core of gynocentrism, it did lead a lot into what gynocentrism would become, because when he later had a granddaughter, and her name was, of course, Eleanor of Aquitaine. And I'm sure many people have heard about what Eleanor of Aquitaine was famous for. Yep, you guessed it. She was the reason why chivalry existed for over 200 years. It was because of her that women were given more rights than men overall, and that they were the ones who were required to do everything for women, while they just sit at home, sit on their chairs, and look highly into the sea as they look over the fact saying that I did everything by doing absolutely nothing except manipulate people with my hips. Kind of similar to Lady Tyrell in Game of Thrones. Except, of course, because George R.R. Martin is a huge feminist himself, he always has to paint her as the truthful one, while the rest of the guys are either idiots or evil. Of course, she did get some of her comeuppance when she tried to manipulate her own son Henry into attempting to overthrow her second husband, Henry II, and because of that she spent 16 years in prison. She did eventually die a couple of years later. What many people don't know, though, is of course, for those who don't know, she was greedy enough to be buried with all of her jewelry. If you don't believe me, here's a picture right here showing the sure fucking greed of women, of some women. Unfortunately, this wouldn't be most people would think that this form of chivalry went extinct in the 1700s, but it actually got worse. It was around the 1500s that, because of Eleanor of Aquitaine's influences, that we had something that was that was known as the querelle des femmes, or essentially the woman's question, which began in Italy. And what this was essentially was basically a war against genders, we're asking questions about how women are better than men and why they are, and of course how men are better than women. Of course, when it came to how women were better than men, they essentially needed men to fight for them. One of them was Heinrich Agrippa, who stated that men oppressed women not for natural differences, but for social reasons. Because they didn't belong, they weren't able to communicate, blah, blah, blah. So he says, yes, we have to give them the same rights, and say that all men of all races are essentially servants to women. Their roles have to be that they have to serve her in order for peace to be sustained, which of course is a huge amount of fucking bullshit. This later evolved in the 1600s when a woman named Lucrezia Marinella wrote a book called The Nobility and Excellence of Women and Defects of and Voices of Men, which is basically just another radical way of supporting the female gender over the male gender. Ironically enough, the reason why she wrote that book was because she had a feud against Giuseppe Fossi, who had written that some women had several defects. So of course which just evolved into another battle in the gender wars, and part of the querelle des femmes. Another key factor was when Modesta Pozzo in 1590 wrote this quote, which I quote, "Don't we see that men's rightful task to go out to work and wear themselves out, trying to accumulate wealth, as though they were our fats or stewards, so that we can remain at home like the lady of the house, directing their work and enjoying the profit of their labors." The good news is that she was honest about being a controlling bitch. But the reason why I say this is that all of these things have been happening long before the women's suffrage movement. I mean, we could essentially say that all of these things that happened before first wave feminism occurred in 1848, men were inspired by these events that have been going on. And then we had things going, and then it evolved into other things which happened in other countries, like another form of the woman's question in the United Kingdom, USA, Canada, and Russia. And then, of course, women suffragettes led by the soulless bitch Emmeline Pankhurst. So that essentially covers my first issue. My second issue is when you decided to equate MGTOW to feminism and communism. See, in your video response, you stated that they have certain similarities. Like, while giving an accurate description of communism and feminism, you did not explain properly how this relates to MGTOW, because MGTOW, this is where I believe you're confusing MGTOW with MRAs, because MRAs are the ones who want the equal rights. They're the ones who want their rights back and of course need women to do it for them. Otherwise, if it was just men doing it, they would get overthrown by the third wave feminazis and social justice warriors. So that's where I believe you were wrong, and you also missed the purpose of why people go MGTOW. MGTOW is essentially a response to third wave feminism. This is us saying we've had enough of your bullshit. We are not going to be treated like slaves. We're not going to be treated like the same people who got mistreated back in the 13 to 1500s during Eleanor of Aquitaine's rule and during the Querelle des Femmes, because this was essentially just more control over more women getting their rights and then men getting screwed over. And now it's history literally repeating itself, and quite frankly, we don't want to be part of that. And then this is where I go into my last point, which really pissed me off. You stated that going out of a relationship or not getting married is the wrong thing to do. It makes you look like a coward or a beta male. See, I have to ask you a question. How is getting out of an abusive relationship, or an abusive that has the potential to be abusive, considered being a coward? I call it being cautious, trying to save your ass from someone who can ruin your life, just in the blink of an eye. And look, here's some statistics. I mean, we've got 70% of women who are instigating divorce. And the reason why they instigate divorce, it's not because they're happy. It's because they've got something to gain. It's all about greed. Like how sex drives men to make certain decisions, money drives women to make certain decisions. And they know that when we have resources and they no longer need our services, they could just divorce us and they automatically get 50%. I mean, look what happened with my uncle. He was married for 37 years and he was working for the government, and his wife decided to fuck him over by divorcing him just like that. They never argued. She took 50% of the $500,000 apartment they lived in, and another 50% of the pension that he was working for. He was making $5,000 pension, and now he's only making about $3,000 pension. And as a result of that, now his own daughters hate him because she manipulated them against him by saying she was the one who did everything around the house to make sure that they got a good education, while he was the one whose only job was to get money. She was essentially acting like Modesta Pozzo, married, except my aunt was, of course, married, and Modesta wasn't. Not to mention that you're probably not even aware of what goes on in the Czech Republic. 94% of kids, the child custody, it goes to the mother. And do you know what happens to the father? He has to pay child support, and that child support increases depending on how old the child is. Say, for example, the child is about 10 to 14. He has to pay 15 to 19% of his net salary, while if the child was over 18, he would have to pay between 19 to 25% of his net salary. So how do you claim that men have more rights than women when men are the ones who have to pay for the most part child support and alimony on top of that? And then you wonder why 80% of all suicides are mainly men. As Uncle from Jackie Chan Adventures once said, "You must do research." And only then could you get a proper response. I expect better from you. I really hope that you look into this more and make sure you provide a proper response. That's about all. Piss off.